Thanks so much, Dennis. Appreciate that. As Drew already mentioned, what we're going to be looking at here this morning is kind of a preview of what we're going to be studying in the edification meeting coming up this Friday, September the 5th, at Drew's mom and dad's house. And so I just wanted to kind of touch on that to let you know what you can expect. And really, what I want to do in this little preview is to really emphasizing how important history really is. There's a couple of 3 points that I want to make in this little presentation here. Um, and they all kind of revolve around this idea of understanding the significance of history, and particularly understanding that Genesis is history. It's an accurate recounting of our ancient history. First of all, I think it's important, you can take advantage of this opportunity to see this video because it's going to give you assurance of the reasonableness of your faith. Very often, as Christians, we live in a world that's full of skepticism, and oftentimes that makes us feel belittled, that we are somehow committing intellectual suicide, that we're accepting, fanciful fairy tales and superstitious myths when we accept the biblical account. And coming and watching this video, you're going to see that that is decidedly not the case, that we have overwhelming evidence that supports the actual reasonableness. And I'd even go beyond that to say that it's unreasonable not to accept the biblical account. But that's one of the things that is, I think, very helpful, just to give you reassurance that you have strong, overwhelming evidence upon which your faith is based. It's not just something that you believe because you want to believe it. It's because the evidence demonstrates the conclusion that Genesis is an accurate representation of our history of what happened. And secondly, another reason I think is important is also it may equip you. You may find yourself finding new ways by which you can explain to others who might have questions. Why are you a Christian? Why do you go to church? Why do you believe in the Bible? This video is going to maybe give you new information that you can find helpful in explaining why you are a Christian and why you believe what you believe. But far and away, I think the biggest reason really is to emphasize that it is a correct representation of history, and to emphasize why that's important, that it's a correct interpretation of what we presently observe in the world around about us. And it turns out that being able to interpret what you see right now, what you experience right now, is based upon your understanding of history. In a little while, we'll look at an example. There's a biblical example that shows how not understanding, not having an accurate understanding of history, can really mess up the things that you see and observe presently. And we have a biblical example. And I would say that's the main point of this little presentation this morning, to really emphasize how important an accurate understanding of history is in giving you a foundation and giving you a framework from which you can understand what's going on in the world around about you, and what you're supposed to do about it. What is it that you're supposed to do about it? What is the expectations upon you? Is there any expectations placed upon you? Is there specific ways that you ought to think and act and behave? Is there specific ways you need to react to things that you look out in the world and say, hey, I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's right. And it turns out that that's all very much tied to how you understand history, how you understand that, and not having a good, factual, accurate understanding of history can really mess up how you think about the things that are going on around about you, how you perceive the things that are happening around about you, and especially what you ought to be doing about it and what you ought not to be doing about it. This is, I think, vitally important, and that's one of the things that this is going to talk about. This is Genesis history is really going to anchor that idea of giving you an accurate understanding of what happened a long, long time ago, and understanding that having that accurate understanding of what happened a long, long time ago is really important now, right now, for you to make good decisions in your life right now. There's a guy like Dr. Frank Turek. He's an apologist. He goes all over college campuses all over the United States talking about the evidences that we have to substantiate our faith. And he coined a phrase that really resonates with me. I remember watching one of his presentations in which he told the college audience, because the college kids were getting up, well, we just like to follow the science. We just do what the science, we just go where the science. And he got fed up with that because he said, that's a meaningless statement. When you get up and you say, we just follow the science, he says, I don't think you understand what you're saying, because this is what he pointed out. Science doesn't say anything. It doesn't say anything. Scientists are the ones that say it. And so that's the point. What is the correct interpretation? What we observe is simply what we observe. It's just data. It's just information. The question is, how do we interpret that information? That becomes the essential factor. For instance, no one denies the existence of the Grand Canyon, right? You can go to the Grand Canyon, you can see it. Nobody's going to deny that. The question is, how did it get there? The mere existence of the Grand Canyon, which is a scientifically observable fact, does not of itself, that scientifically observable fact, the existence of the Grand Canyon, does not of itself tell us how it came into being. Did it come into being slowly? I mean, that's what you're going to go. If you go to the Grand Canyon and you hire one of those tours, the tour guide's going to tell you about how over millions of years, the Colorado River slowly eroded out this mile-deep canyon. And it did it over a tremendous period of time. It was a little bit of water, but a long, long time. You see, and that's what they say. But that's not the only answer, Could it be some kind of catastrophic event? And that's what the video Is Genesis History presents. It could have been a huge flood that created that canyon rather quickly. It all comes down to, how do you interpret the data? Okay. And that's what scientists do. And the video begins, interestingly enough, at a canyon near Mount St. Helens that was created in just a few days after the eruption. In fact, it was years after the actual eruption. Another big lake was formed because of a landslide that occurred because of that eruption. And after many years, that plug that slid down the mountain gave way, and suddenly you had this massive release of water as this big lake drained. And in a matter of just 2 days, it cut a canyon over 200 feet deep through solid granite rock. It did that in 48 hours. And the guy, Del Tackett, is the guy that is kind of the host and the narrator of the video. And he grew up in that area, and that's how the video starts. He's standing in that canyon. And it was a catastrophic event. It wasn't there's a little stream he's standing kind of astride that little stream. And there's a little stream that's still running down that canyon, but that little stream's not what made it. What made it was a huge, giant deluge of water in a short period of time. And so that becomes, a big part of the question. They're gonna ask the question: was it a little bit of water over a long period of time, or was it a whole lot of water over a short period of time? And what the video points out is that you have overwhelming evidence that demonstrates that it's the latter, that it was a whole lot of water, massive, almost unimaginable amounts of water over a relatively short period of time, that actually fits the evidence that we go and look at when we go and actually look at the Grand Canyon. So the Genesis history points out that there's a huge problem in the dominant modern day interpretation of those facts, the data. So the film will call that the conventional paradigm, that idea that it was a little bit of water acting over millions of years. That's the conventional paradigm that dominates the present day scientific community. Everything is really, really old, and everything happened really, really slowly. And the video contrasts that with another paradigm that they call the Genesis paradigm, which they point out, well, hold on a second. How do we know that what we've been observing just over the last couple of centuries, and that's the time this conventional paradigm has come to be dominant? It was a geologist by the name of Lyell, I think his name was, that came up with this idea of uniformitarianism, that the present forces that we observe today are the forces that have always been present back into time immemorial. And there's just overwhelming evidence that that's just not true. That's not, that there's lots of evidence for catastrophic events that give a much better explanation for why we see the things that we see when we walk around on the face of this planet that we live in. And going beyond that, it also, the Genesis paradigm also presents that there are actual periodic interventions in which God himself intervened. It presents the creation account as an intervention of God. It presents Noah's flood as an intervention of God. And those interventions and understanding that do a lot better job of actually explaining the way things are now than the so-called conventional paradigm does. And so that's one of the things that's going to talk about. So we have this kind of competition, and that's what the video will be speaking of, looking at the conventional paradigm versus what it brings forth is what it calls the Genesis paradigm. And so the point then of the video is to demonstrate the evidence that shows that actually this Genesis paradigm that looks at various catastrophic events, or at least events that were huge in magnitude, but didn't necessarily take a huge amount of time to accomplish that. The creation account, if you take that literally, the creation account, how many days did it take? Well, the Bible says it took 6 days. Okay. Now there's people that will question that and say, well, maybe they were eons of time. But again, I think is worth considering. The Genesis account says, well, it took 6 days for God to do that. And you stop and think about a being that's powerful enough to speak the worlds into existence. I don't think time becomes a factor for such a being. For a God who has such power, time really is kind of a non-issue. I would think, for a being that possesses that kind of power. So the point is that not only do you have this historical account that says that we have lots of events that were huge in their magnitude and in their impact for what we presently see today, but it also points out that these events often happened very quickly, and they didn't take these massive amounts of time. And so that's one of the things. If you come this Friday, you're going to see the evidence that you're typically not shown. This is a typical high school geology class, and certainly not a college geology class. They're not going to talk about these things, but there's lots of scientists out there. There's lots of geologists. There's lots of archaeologists. There's lots of paleontologists. That's what you'll see in the video. And they say, hey, look, there's lots of evidence. There's all kinds of different ways we can interpret all this stuff. And it turns out that it fits better into what you actually read about. One of the problems that you have is, I think, that dominates in the conventional paradigm that seems to dominate scientific thought and thinking in our modern time is talked about in Psalm 14:1. Let's look at that. You're probably familiar with that. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. And so this idea that says, hey, listen, we're not going to talk about God. There can be nothing outside this universe. There's no spiritual realm. There's nothing above or superior to nature. There's nothing non-material that can exist, and that's all that we're going to talk about. And we're going to rule out any ability to talk about the spiritual realm, to talk about God, to talk about the fact that maybe something non-material actually exists. We're just refusing to look at the evidence. And that's, again, what the video will show up. There's lots of evidence that says that assumption is simply not true. There's lots of evidence to show that the non-material realm exists. There's lots of evidence to show that God exists, and that's what this verse is talking about. It's foolish to just dismiss that out of hand. And there's several logical reasons that point out the foolishness of just being dismissive of this idea that the only thing we're going to talk about is materialistic in its nature. And anything non-material, we're going to rule out from the get-go. Well, first of all, it rules out God before the fact. Okay. And that's what the conventional paradigm does. If you want to talk about God, you're going to be shown the door very quickly. You're kind of kicked out of the club because we're just not going to talk about that kind of stuff. And so it doesn't really look at the evidence and doesn't ask the question, well, do we have any evidence that shows that maybe a non-material realm actually exists? If there's such a thing as a spiritual realm, there's such a thing as God. Maybe there's evidence that demonstrates that. No, we're not going to look at that. It just rules it out from the get-go. Well, that's not very scientific, is it? Isn't scientific supposed to be you're able to ask whatever questions you want to ask and ask them whenever you want to ask them, and we're going to discuss them, and we're going to go out and we're going to go wherever the answers to those questions take us? Or are we going to, from the get-go, just start ruling out, well, there's certain questions that you're not allowed to ask if you want to belong to the club? And so that's a foolish thing to do, especially for someone who claims to be a scientist. I've already alluded to the second reason it's foolish, because it ostracizes those who wish to consider the possibility of God. What if? Let's just kind of spitball this idea for a little bit. And again, is there any evidence? And again, that's one of the things that you'll see when you come and watch the video, is Genesis history, because there is mountains of evidence that shows the distinct possibility of God, okay? And finally, it limits the conclusion based on irrelevant concerns, okay? What does the fact that the idea may be, and I think this is the underlying thing, is that God makes lots of people feel very uncomfortable, because the implication of God implies accountability. See, and I don't want to be held accountable. And so it's that uneasy feeling. It's that idea of, I just don't want to go there. I just don't want to talk about that. Well, my question is, again, let's just use the Grand Canyon as an example. What does your uneasy feeling about God have to do with how the Grand Canyon came into existence? It has nothing to do with it. And yet they are making that. They're allowing that bias to overrule an honest interpretation of the data that's available to them. And so this is very much at the core of what is going to be discussed in this video is Genesis history. It's all about that. There are no off-limit questions. The very title of the video demonstrates the openness. Is God history? And it's asked as a question. Let's just explore this as a question. Let's just look at the evidence and let's go where the evidence takes us. The conventional paradigm is openly discussed, albeit it is done from an opposing point of view. They propose what they call the Genesis paradigm, but you will find that the film is rational and reasonable in the exploration of the actual evidence itself. And so what I think is really important is the idea, and this is what I said at the outset, it's the idea the film demonstrates the need for an accurate historical context as the framework, the foundation upon which you begin to understand the present world around about you, what your position in that present world around about you is. Are there any things I should do? Are there any things I shouldn't do? And this historical context proves to be the foundation, the essential, I would say it's the essential foundation that gives you the ability to come to those understandings. Genesis is an accurate record of history. It's an accurate record of what actually happened. And that is woefully lacking in the conventional paradigm. The conventional paradigm does not understand history. They do not understand what really, really happened, see? And that's its weak link. You can see an example of this, of how important it is to have an accurate understanding of history in a dialogue that Jesus has with two disciples on the road to Emmaus. Now, this is after Jesus has been resurrected. These two disciples are flabbergasted by these events that have just occurred in Jerusalem, and they don't know what to make of them. And that's what I want you to focus on. We're going to rather lengthy reading, so get your Bibles out and follow along with me, because what we're going to see Jesus doing is he remedies the situation by pointing out to them an accurate understanding of their history. That's how he kind of clues them in to how they need to understand all these things that have just happened. You know, these ideas that, you know, people are going around saying that this Jesus came back to life, and we don't know what to make of that, and we're just confused, and we kind of thought that he was going to be the one that would restore Israel to its status and glory, and now, you know, he got killed, but they're saying he's coming back to life, and we just don't know what to make of it. Well, what you're going to see Jesus do is he's going to go back in history, and he's going to explain to them their history. And when they have an accurate understanding of the history, everything becomes crystal clear. All those mysterious events that occurred that they couldn't make heads or tails of initially suddenly pop into crystal clarity. Let's read this fascinating event here. In Luke 24, beginning at verse 13, now behold, two of them were traveling that same day to a village called Emmaus, which was 7 miles from Jerusalem, and they talked together of all these things which had happened. So they're talking about all these things that happened back in Jerusalem, the crucifixion, the rumored resurrection of the Christ. So it was while they conversed and reasoned that Jesus himself drew near and went to them, but their eyes were restrained so that they did not know him. So as far as these two disciples are concerned, as they're talking about these things, it's just a guy that walks up to him. And so this guy, unbeknownst to them, is Jesus. This guy comes up and says, what kind of conversation is this that you have had with one another as you walk and are sad? And when one of them, who was named Cleopas, answered and said to him, are you the only stranger in Jerusalem? Have you not known the things that have happened in these days? Where you been? You been under a rock? Well, yeah, I kind of have. But you know, they're just flabbergasted. Well, you know, where you been? How have you not hold it? And so Jesus says, well, what things? So they said to the things concerning Jesus of Nazareth. who was a prophet, mighty in deed and of word before God and all the people, and how the chief priests and our rulers delivered him to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we were hoping that he was going to redeem Israel. Indeed, besides all this, today is the third day since these things have happened. And yes, certain women of our company who arrived at the tomb early astonished us when they did not find his body. They came saying that they'd also seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. And certain of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the woman had said, but they did not see him. And then he said to them, "O foolish ones," and slow up. This is Jesus' response now. They're very confused. They don't know, they can't make head or tails of all this stuff they've been hearing. They're confused because, well, we thought he was going to redeem Israel. We thought he was going to restore Israel to its greater glory. And now we think those hopes are all dashed. And now this crazy rumor that he's alive. And then he said to them, "O foolish ones, slow of heart to believe all the prophets, all that the prophets have spoken. Ought not the Christ to have suffered these things and to enter into his glory?" So that's the first hint. He's going back in history and reminding them, if you knew your history, you go back to those prophets and you'll see that all these things that have got you completely flummoxed right now, every one of them was predicted. And if you had an accurate understanding of history, you would know that. He's going to explain it in even greater detail as he goes on in verse 27. And beginning at Moses and all the prophets, he expounded to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. See what Jesus is doing? He's going back in history, isn't he? He's going back to the historical prophetic accounts, and he's explaining, this is what it said. All this stuff that is so perplexing to you, your idea of the redemption of Israel, you're probably thinking of that in a physical, literal sense, and it was never promised to be a physical, literal redemption. That's why you're confused, because you don't have an accurate understanding of your history. You don't have an accurate understanding of what the prophet said. See, it becomes essential to have an accurate understanding of history for you to understand and interpret the events that are happening right now. And you know what? That's true for you and me today. It's just as true for us. We have to have an accurate understanding of history to make heads or tails of the things that are going on around about us now. Let's continue our reading, picking up where we left off in verse 28. Then they drew near the village where they were going, and he indicated that he would have gone farther, and they constrained him, saying, "Abide with us, for it is toward evening, and the day is far spent." And he went to stay with them. Now it came to pass, as he sat at table with them, that he took bread, blessed it, broke it, and gave it to them. And then their eyes were opened, and they knew him, and he vanished from their sight. What a magnificent moment that had to be, when everything comes into crystal clarity for them. And again, it's tied back to an accurate understanding of their history that did that. And notice then the reaction of verse 32 of the two disciples. And they said to one another, "Did not our heart burn within us while he talked with us on the road and while he opened the scriptures to us?" And so finally, with great clarity, they understand the scriptures were opened. They have an accurate understanding of history, and that's the key element that allowed them to make heads and tails out of the events that had just transpired. And that's what the conventional paradigm strips away from us. The conventional paradigm strips away an accurate understanding of history. It says, no, you didn't come from God. No, you were not created in the image of God. You came from an animal, a monkey. And there's no purpose or plan to it. It's just a cosmic accident. There's no rhyme or reason to it. See, can you see how that is going to have a profound, if you believe that that's your history, if that's your backstory of how you came into being, can you see how profound that view is and how it's going to affect, what you think you ought to be doing? I think it explains precisely why we see people, I don't know how to put it, behaving like animals. Because the conventional paradigm says you're what? You're an animal. That's all you are, is an animal. So So little wonder that we look out in the world around about us and see people behaving that way, because that's what they think the backstory is. See, it turns out that history, a proper, accurate understanding of our history, is an essential element in making sense of what you see right now, of your purpose, of how you came to be where you are right now. You see, the Genesis story is an accurate presentation of what really happened. And as it turns out, what really happened is very, very important. So we see Jesus giving an accurate historical context that allowed the two disciples to properly interpret observable events. And the point of this lesson is Genesis does the same thing. Genesis will give you the proper foundation for you to understand who you are, what your place in this world is, and most importantly, where you are going. Do you have a plan for where you're going to spend your eternity? The study of Genesis will really help you come to a better understanding of what that plan ought to look like and what you ought to be planning for and what life really is all about. If you're at a point where you begin to understand that, like these two disciples, I think you will find as their reaction, your heart will burn within you, and it will burn with joy, understanding I have meaning, I have purpose, my life is significant. God has a plan for me. And you can take one more step in the forward progress of that plan by committing yourself to Jesus Christ this morning. Come forward, hear, believe, repent, confess, and be baptized. If you've already done that, but you've strayed from that plan, you see that you've sinned. As a Christian, you always have the privilege to ask God to forgive you. Likewise, you can request the prayers of the brethren on your behalf. If there's any way this morning we can be of spiritual help to you, come forward, make those wishes known while together we stand and sing.